Thank you.
There we go. We're going to start over. Now we are broadcasting on YouTube. So this is the subcommittee hearing for House Bill 225. The title of the bill is relative to prohibiting the use of currency that could be detrimental to privacy rights. This bill was introduced last year by Representative Belcher, and it was held over the summer and then this year sent to interim study, and this is the interim study work session on the bill. The committee felt the bill was not ready for prime time, and the sponsor agreed with us and sent us some written testimony. He says, this is Representative Mike Belcher, regarding the necessity for such a bill as this. I believe it's become more and more clear that it is, in fact, wholly necessary to make measures to protect New Hampshire residents from the burgeoning digital control mechanisms that threaten freedom and liberty. However, many legitimate issues have been raised regarding the exact wording of this bill. I would request that the committee consider taking whatever action deemed most appropriate to promote the study of the issue for the development of better language, such that another better bill might come forward in the next session. So those were his comments. And so we're going to do something a little bit different. We have Nick Antony, who is an expert on digital currency from the Cato Institute, and he's joining us by Zoom, and we thank him for his time. We got started a little late here. So Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you. You have written testimony, which was emailed to the committee last night. Representative Gibbs, I have a copy for you.
Oh, I saw what you emailed, but thank
Okay,
you.
there's a written copy.
Thank you.
Representative Magoo, do you need a copy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will take one, actually, if you have it. I don't know if I saw that email. Don't see it here.
We'll pass that on. And then, Mr. Anthony, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I'm going to have to move my microphone to the speaker so that the people on YouTube that will listen to this can hear you speak.
Oh, I apologize. I do have it, actually. That was attached to the same email.
That's
I do
right.
have it. And I did read it.
Okay, great. All right, so without further ado, Mr. Anthony, we'll give you up to 10 minutes, and then we might want to ask you some questions afterwards, okay? And let me
That sounds good.
And I'm going to turn off some.
Well,
Go ahead.
well, Vice Chair Hammond and members
There
of
we
the
go.
committee,
We're gonna
thank
start
you
over.
for the opportunity to testify
Now we are
today.
broadcasting on.
My name is Nicholas Anthony, and I'm a policy
So
analyst
this is
at the
the
Cato
subcommittee,
Institute Center for Monetary and
hearing
Financial
for
Alternatives, a fellow at
House
the
Bill
Human Rights
225,
Foundation, and the author
the
of the
title of
book
the bill
Digital
is
Currency
relative to
or Digital
prohibiting
Control,
the use
Decoding
of currency that
CBDC
could
and
be
the Future of
detrimental to
Money.
privacy rights.
The term
This bill was
central
introduced
bank
last
digital
year by
currency, or
Belcher,
CBDC,
and it
has
was held
quickly
over-
shifted from an academic idea to an economic reality. According to the Human Rights Foundation's CBDC tracker, over 1.5 billion people currently live in countries where CBDCs have been rolled out. Yet, many people still have no idea what a CBDC is, let alone whether their government is pursuing one. It's for this reason that I'm grateful for the opportunity to testify here today. So first, what is a CBDC? In short, it's a digital national currency that is a direct liability of a country's central bank. Typically, discussions of CBDCs revolve around the retail model, where CBDC is designed for consumers to use in day-to-day purchases. At first glance, this description might sound uncontroversial, considering most of us make some form of digital payment every day. What is different with a CBDC, however, is that the government would ultimately be the one processing those transactions. So rather than have transactions spread across banks, credit unions, and the like, financial transactions would be centralized in the hands of the federal government. And it's for this reason the creation of a US CBDC would pose a fundamental threat to financial privacy, likely the greatest since the enactment of the Bank Secrecy Act and the establishment of the third-party doctrine. With so much information in hand, a CBDC would enable the government to restrict financial freedom in countless ways. Unfortunately, the observations in practice have given us little to be hopeful about. If I were to summarize the international experience thus far, it would boil down to two categories: a restriction on the lives of citizens and a waste of taxpayer resources. For example, in Nigeria, the government caused a cash shortage in hopes of spurring adoption when only 0.5% of the population was using its CBDC. In the Bahamas, the government will soon force banks to distribute its CBDC. And most recently in Thailand, the government launched a quasi-CBDC through a digital wallet that restricts payments to government-approved goods at government-approved stores within the district listed on each person's ID card. These restrictions are also taking place in subtler ways. As documented in the Human Rights Foundation CBDC tracker, officials in the Bahamas, the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, Jamaica, Lebanon, Nigeria, Peru, Rwanda, the Solomon Islands, and more have all said the goal is to go cashless and that CBDCs are the way they will get there. But what about the question of whether CBDCs are an appropriate use of taxpayer resources? Again, from the international experience, we see that governments that have launched CBDCs are struggling to get anyone to use them on a day-to-day basis. The public generally recognizes that their needs are being met by existing options like mobile banking, payment apps, and cash. So, in the best case, it's a waste of taxpayer resources because it does not offer any unique benefits that are not already being provided for by the market. In the worst case, CBDCs could threaten financial privacy, freedom, and markets at large, issues that have already begun to surface. With these concerns in mind, what role is there, though, at the state level? It's a difficult question. Members of Congress have the authority to limit the Federal Reserve so it doesn't move forward, but options are limited at the state level. There are really three legislative approaches that officials have taken or considered thus far. The first option is to prohibit the use of CBDCs entirely. Given concerns on the table, it's understandable why this option might appear appealing. However, it poses significant concerns. Imagine if a constituent went to the Bahamas on vacation and came home with some of the Bahamian CBDC left over. How would enforcement work? Would the state establish a surveillance network to monitor travel? Would the citizen be searched upon returning to the state? Unfortunately, this path can quickly devolve into its own assault on financial privacy and freedom. The second option lies in what many states have done over the past few years, namely classify CBDCs within state statutes so they are excluded from the definition of money in the Uniform Commercial Code, or UCC. Unfortunately, these options also have extended consequences. A person or business may still use a CBDC under this approach. It's just that they are not afforded the legal protections one might typically expect under the UCC. So again, it's unfortunately the citizens that stand to lose. A third option is to explicitly prohibit state agencies from using a CBDC or participating in CBDC programs. Where the first option is too hot and the second option is perhaps too cold, this third option might be just right. It does not restrict the freedoms of individual citizens, but it does limit the hands of government. Now, unfortunately, all three options appear vulnerable to the Supremacy Clause. In fact, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis acknowledged that his bill would likely be overridden if Congress chose to move forward. But it should be said that the 10th Amendment Center has argued that the Supremacy Clause is not so black and white in practice. The same argument came up when states initially began to legalize cannabis, and the experience with the ongoing delay of Real ID implementation shows that states are, if nothing else, able to establish roadblocks that slow down the process. With that in mind, there's a fourth option on the table that should also be considered. All three legislative approaches have in common that they send a message. They show that states are watching and they will not silently fall into line. However, there are other ways to do this too. State officials are in a unique position to bridge the gap between citizens and the larger government. Raising awareness and making sure concerns are being heard by members of Congress is crucial. That can be done through town halls, op-eds, letters, and even meetings such as this one. These avenues should not be underestimated. In closing, The committee is correct to keep an eye on the rise of CBDCs and what options are on the table. I thank Vice Chair Ammon and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak on this issue, and I welcome any questions you may have, large or small.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Nick, for your testimony. I appreciate it. So if I understand you correctly, the Cato Institute recommendation would be passing similar legislation to some of the other states, or recommending that New Hampshire consider legislation that limits New Hampshire's participation or ability to accept digital currency as a more means of tender, essentially to message the federal government that we do not approve of such currency. Does that make sense?
Were you able to hear that, Nick?
Oh, maybe not.
Nick, were you able to hear Representative Magoo's question?
Wouldn't look like it.
Okay, let's see what's going on here.
By the stunned silence,
There you are.
maybe not.
I had, we had a little feedback earlier. I turned the microphone off.
Okay.
So we were talking to you, Nick, and you weren't able to hear us. So I'll let Representative Magoo repeat the question.
Hi, it's Representative Tim McHugh. So I'm just going to sort of paraphrase then. Is it the Cato Institute's suggestion that that New Hampshire consider legislation that would perhaps limit the state's, New Hampshire's ability to accept digital currency as a means of payment for any sort of payment to the state, as a means to essentially send a message to the United States federal government that we don't approve of this sort of invasive privacy type of currency, like the way you've described it being implemented in other countries?
So I have to be very careful in that the Cato Institute can't endorse any legislation, but what I can say is that if states are to take a legislative approach, I think that's the best option on the table, is to make sure that it's saying that the state agencies are not going to require this as payment or force citizens to use it, and they're not going to participate in these programs. That makes sure that you're not having any sweeping restrictions on the citizens, and also you're still managing to send that message and ultimately have the federal government have to say something. If they want to push forward with this, then they have to acknowledge why all these states had a problem with it and why they're moving ahead anyway.
Thank you. Yes, I guess a follow up. But your position is pretty clear that it's an invasive means of tracking expenditures, tracking individuals' movements, expenses, all sorts of things that the federal government could use for countless other things. I mean, every bit of somebody's personal life. And that's the potentially Orwellian future if the central bank digital currency comes to pass. And that's potentially why North Carolina and several other states have decided that this isn't the right way for their state to go. I mean, am I understanding that correctly? I mean, what I've read and heard from your testimony and others, and the research from other states, it's why it's really not the New Hampshire way, and it's not in line with our constitutionally protected right to privacy, right? In New Hampshire.
Yeah, you are correct. That is why so many people are concerned about this, and why so many people have been speaking out just really year after year. And it's why I spend a lot of my time working here in DC with Congress to try to put serious restrictions on the Federal Reserve and the Department of the Treasury to say they cannot go ahead and do this of their own accord because it represents a fundamental affront to really the Constitution at large, very specifically the Fourth Amendment, quite obviously, but really it gets into a whole hornet's nest of problems. And again, to your point, that is why so many states are looking at this and saying, wait, no, this is not something that we want to have.
You have another question?
I do. So we passed Senate Bill 255. It was a privacy act. I was one of the sponsors. It was one of the first bills to get signed this year. I mean, isn't this kind of a follow-up? I mean, isn't this one of the things that we didn't pass at this biennium, but shouldn't it be one of our legislative priorities to look at other things that we can do to proactively protect the privacy of our citizens? I mean, isn't that what we're seeing happen across the country?
Yes, I really could not agree more that this is something that should be a focus, and the timing is really quite brilliant because across the country, Americans are noticing that this financial privacy that they thought they had, and even this general sense of privacy that they thought they had, is really an illusion of privacy. It's been something that's been chipped away at for decades, and now people are noticing more than ever before. And so it really is good to get ahead of this and not wait for the next catastrophe, whether that be a CBDC, a data leak, or what have you. It's better to get ahead of these problems and try to fix them before they become problems that are affecting people's day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I mean, it just editorializing, it frightens me now. You talk about something in your living room, and you know she is listening, right? Alexa, Siri, one of them is listening, and then the next thing you know, you're in your car and you get an ad for whatever you were just talking about. Yeah, I mean, that's creepy enough. Yeah.
Representative Gibbs, you have a question?
I do. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Anthony, for coming in a somewhat unusual manner, but I appreciate it. I have a couple of questions, one very specific and the other very general. The first specific one is you mentioned that some countries have actually decided to use a central bank digital currency. And what I am wondering is, while such a decision may have been made, is anybody in that country, for instance, in the Bahamas, actually using such a currency? And more specifically, if I were to go to the Bahamas and go to a bank to exchange my dollars for the local currency, would I get the local currency as I normally would in a foreign country, or would I get some kind of a digital currency?
Thank you. Those are such good questions. On the first one, unfortunately, despite the countless amount of money that's being spent on these projects, they are not going to good use. People are not using the central bank digital currencies where they've been launched. So one example is in Nigeria. This is the largest population in Africa, if I'm not mistaken. Only 0.5% of the population started using the CBDC. We're seeing that same experience elsewhere in the Bahamas. Very few people are using it, and that's why the government is going to soon force the banks to distribute it, to try to make people use it. Even in China, we've seen examples of people saying they get, for example, government employees get their
Follow-up question on the specific issue. If I went to the Bahamas and got that digital wallet that you were describing, and I then went to a souvenir shop to buy a souvenir, could I actually pay for it with that digital wallet, or would they refuse to accept it?
Bit of a tricky answer. It's a coin flip, so to speak. One of the big problems that they've been having in the Bahamas specifically is to get any merchant to onboard with this. Nobody wants to have a brand new payments terminal on their desk, so they refuse to use it. And so you might find some shops that use it, but the vast majority do not use it. And this CBDC has been out there for, I believe, 4 years now. And it's still just such a toss-up if you have any opportunity to use it.
Oh, sorry.
question?
Second follow-up
Go
question.
ahead, yep.
So doesn't that seem to get rid of the problem that somebody could come back from the Bahamas and have some of these CBDCs left over? Because if they're not using it, you're not going to get it, and you're not going to have any left over. It would seem that problem would kind of not exist.
Bit of a silver lining when we consider any of the risks, whether in this case of coming back to the States or with the financial privacy, freedom, and market concerns that are there, is that if nobody uses them, then there really isn't those problems coming into practice. They luckily remain in the theoretical realm.
All right. Thank you,
I'm
Mr.
not
Professor.
surprised.
Do you have another question?
I do.
Okay.
May I ask it?
Yeah, we have, we're 20 minutes in, so we want to keep conscious of time.
Okay, I'll try and be as quick as I
All
can.
right, thank you.
Okay, the general question has to do with the fact that my bank knows a great deal about me. You mentioned that this would be the government processing transactions instead of banks. My bank knows a great deal about me, but I don't trust them with any information that I don't have to, because historically, banks are not that reliable. So I don't give them any information I don't have to. Now, I have had to give them a lot of information, but I try and keep it to the minimum. The federal government, on the other hand, already knows everything about me, because I used to work for the federal government, and I had to get what was very like a security clearance. It, in fact, used the same form as a security clearance. I got investigated. The federal government knows everything about me. And that was part of my job. And the bottom line for me was that I trusted the federal government more than I trusted the bank, based on the historical record. So I guess my general question for you is, why do you trust the bank more than you trust the federal government?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of angles that I could go at this with, but the main one I want to focus, because our time's limited, is I much rather have my information at one place here and they have only what they need, just like you described, only what they need, and I have someone else with only what they need, so that if any one of those is compromised, whether it's a hack, whether it's an employee mishap or something else, at least not everything is taken. When it comes to having everything in the hands of the federal government, I'm very glad to hear that you have had a positive experience, but I very much worry that if we talk about having every American's information in a central database, that's not only going to present a target for like for-profit hackers that might be targeting the banks, but unfortunately that's also going to inspire this country's enemies, who are going to do it as an act of warfare as well, and not think about it in the same economic calculation of, is it worth it to go after this? It's just going to be, we're trying to completely undermine the system. And it presents a, unfortunately, unprecedented target in what it would have. And it's a little rare that somebody like myself, speaking from the Cato Institute, a libertarian and think tank, will have room for agreement with officials from the Federal Reserve. But this is even something that the Federal Reserve has come out and said we are deeply concerned about, and it's something that we don't know how to avoid.
Thank you.
So North Carolina just passed House Bill 690, and they did it. They even overrode the governor's veto with a bipartisan override. Oh, thank you. House Bill 690 in North Carolina, they overrode the governor's veto in a bipartisan way. Democrats and Republicans came together to pass this fairly simple bill. It has a definition of central bank digital currency, and then it just says that state agencies, and it has a list, basically shall not be involved with testing or using a central bank digital currency. Why do you think they did that? First part of the question. And if you could project from short term out to long term, what do you think is your projection as the risk of a central bank digital currency being imposed on us at some point in the future, maybe during a financial crisis or some other event?
So I think specifically on the state level, I think one benefit to take out of there is that if we have states speaking out and saying that they are not going to be involved in this project, they're not going to require it, force it, basically a signal, a kind of unofficial vote of sorts. I will say it seems to be more of an if question now. A few years ago, it felt like a when. Most people were talking about it as an inevitable. But what you flagged is so important because it used to be that it was inevitable that it'll happen no matter what, good times or bad times. Now it feels like an if question for at least the good times. But if there's a crisis, heaven forbid, another pandemic, a war, a recession, or what have you, we have seen that the federal government will mobilize quickly, and specifically the Federal Reserve and the Department of the Treasury will mobilize quickly. Both were considering a CBDC during the pandemic, and it was really only by the speed of what was happening interrupting those plans. So it's very likely that one could be rolled out if a sufficient crisis were to arise. Granted, again, I just want to emphasize that becomes harder and harder with the more people that are speaking out because those concerns have to be addressed if it is to happen.
All right. Any further questions? Any further questions?
No.
Thank you very much for your time, Nick. And you broke, believe it or not, in the 21st century.
That's great. Super.
So thank you very much. And you're welcome to stick around or drop off. I know you have a flight to catch, but we'll continue the conversation here.
Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm always happy to lend a hand where I can.
Very good. All right. Bye for now. Thank you. All right. I think I appreciated having someone who's been thinking about this for years.
Great.
You want to try
weigh
your own
in.
microphone, Keith?
Yeah. Was that turned off? Okay. I think the master switch there. Never mind. If you hit this,
Just leave it.
Yeah,
there So everybody can talk. There you go.
yeah, okay. I appreciated the remote testimony. We might have had a few hiccups for the YouTube stream, but we'll get it worked out next time. Any thoughts on how to proceed with our subcommittee recommendation? I think it's just Representative Magoo and myself.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's, so if I understand correctly, our only motion to make is to recommend further legislation. I mean, when we exec the bill, I mean, we will have an executive session and we'll recommend as a full committee. Yeah, we'll recommend as a full committee that someone should file another LSR or not.
Yeah.
And that really is a bit non-binding.
Discuss
It is very non-binding. But I would say that the current bill 225 is not recommended for future legislation, and mainly because the definitions aren't very well defined.
Right.
And then maybe somewhere in the blurb, we mentioned that, I mean, this bill would be a lot closer to something that I think might get passed,
The North Carolina.
the North Carolina,
Yeah.
and that's just the latest version. So maybe something else will come out between now and filing day, but recommend 225 and not for future legislation, with the caveat
Yeah, put it in the blurb.
in the blurb, we can recommend just pointing to this other bill that it exists, and it's at least a better defined bill.
Yeah, subject matter wise, I mean, it's important we consider for the reasons I mentioned. I mean, it's a pretty high priority that we do what we do in New Hampshire, which is get ahead of the game on these types of issues. I mean, it's important that we do that. That clearly wasn't the right vehicle. It's not the right language. There's some other better language out there, but this committee does it very well when it comes to considering those types of issues ahead of parts of the rest of the country. And we should continue to do that.
I think so too. There's talk in the full committee about prophylactic legislation, prophylactic. But to me, you want to put barriers between encroaches on our citizens' rights. So if there's a potential encroachment on a right, it's good to have a barrier there that needs to be penetrated before the rights are infringed upon, right? So that to me, that would be-
Proactive.
right? It's somewhat
Sure.
right, but we want to do that selectively and carefully. So
Yeah, I agree.
all right, so
Agreed.
I'll make a motion. The subcommittee will recommend not for future recommendation, with the caveat, just at least making people aware of the North Carolina bill and any other similar bills that have passed recently.
Second.
Okay. All right. All in favor? I think it's just me and you, Tim.
Oh, well, there we go. Oh, aye.
Okay. Any opposed? No. 2-0. It's amazing what you can do. All right.
Take 5 before we start.
Yeah, you want to take 5?
Yeah, I go to the bathroom.
All right, we'll take 5. open the subcommittee hearing on House Bill 1674. So this bill, I'll just give a little history on this bill. A former state senator, Jim Forsyth, asked me to put this bill in, and I worked with him over about a year ago. We worked together to put this bill in. And, you know, we had public hearings on it. It was probably too big of a bite at the apple because it contained 3 different sections. It was have the state declare gold and silver as legal tender, which several other states have done. The second one was the state treasurer would set up a bullion depository, and at least Texas has done that already. So gold bullion depository. And the third thing, which was a little bit of a stretch, was issue digital tokens as receipts for the bullion. Those digital tokens could be redeemable and exchangeable. And there are gold-backed digital tokens in the marketplace, but just not backed up by a sovereign state. So nobody's done that yet. In talking with Senator Forsyth, who has since passed away, unfortunately, he died in a windsurfing accident and has passed. But in talking to him, his concern is about the fact that the federal monetary policy seems to be going off the rails. And just like some current stats, the national debt is $34+ trillion, over 200,000 per taxpayer. The largest budget item in the federal budget, even higher than national defense, is the interest on the debt. It's over $1 trillion. And our deficit spending is almost $2 trillion a year. So the government is spending $2 trillion more than it takes in every year. And that seems to be accelerating. And so the thought is that because the federal government has the ability to print new money, they can debase the currency, and that debases the value that they owe, that $34 trillion plus dollars. They can pay it back in dollars that are worth less in the future. And that seems to be the direction that it's going in. How do we protect our citizens from that process? Senator Forsyth was a big sound money guy, and we know in the in the federal constitution, it's in Article 10. It talks about gold and silver being money. That's a very old. So here it is. I have it on the screen there. Make anything. So that it says the powers denied to the states. They cannot do these things, and they cannot make anything but gold and silver a tender in payment in debts. And so that's the key phrase that other states have picked up on. Our committee researcher, Kristen, has kindly given us a list. This is as recent as February, so this might have changed since. But there are, I'll list a couple of the states that have some legal tender laws on the books: Arizona, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and West Virginia all have some exemptions that take gold and silver and give it the status of legal tender. One of the things you notice when you look through this is that a lot of it has to do with exempting from sales and income taxes. And so our state doesn't have a sales or income tax. But we do have business taxes, so there might be some application for businesses to transact in gold and silver. I think the demand is probably very low at the current time. So anyway, that's the gist of the original House Bill 1674. What I did at our last session, right before our executive session, I just carved out the legal tender portion of it. So I whittled it way back, took out the bullion depository, took out the digital tokens. Those are our ideas before their time, in my opinion, and just made it to the legal tender aspect. So maybe we can just limit our discussion to the legal tender piece of it. And that's a House Amendment 2024-0373H. That's the amendment that I'm talking about. If you need a copy, I have some copies here. you want to take a minute to read it over? And this would sort of mimic what other states have done. And again, I think there's some concerns about municipalities accepting gold and silver. And so the intention would be to not mandate this, but make it, enabling. But I don't know, Municipal Association, do you want to have anything to add? I know you've weighed in before. Yeah, you want to come up? And I'll just, when I put this bill in November 2023, gold was at $1,900 an ounce. And yesterday it was 2670, so it's 40% more. But the way to think about it is the value of the dollar has gone down. The purchasing power of that gold stays roughly the same. So that's a really difficult thing for the American mind to comprehend because we're not used to dealing in different currencies. Maybe before the EU was established, you would think about, exchange rates between countries. But so anyway, that's just a little piece of trivia. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much, Representative Amon. My name is Catherine Hack. I represent the 234 cities and towns in New Hampshire at the Municipal Association, and we did have some conversations and some testimony around the original bill and some concerns we had about municipalities being mandated. And working with the sponsors, we discussed having it be enabling legislation because, as Representative Amon just pointed out, it would be like trading in foreign currency on a regular basis. And municipalities, especially our smallest communities, are not set up to trade in any type of currency on a daily basis and check prices. And these are tax dollars that we're working with. So if the price went down one day and we happened to trade because we needed to make payroll, because we were even under enabling, we could potentially be losing tax dollars in the trade. In the exchange of funds, right? So we also, if it's physical silver and gold, the physical metals, maybe palladium, platinum, whatever it happens to be, we don't have facilities to store them safely, and we are required already by law to bring $1,500 or more to the bank on a daily basis. That's already in state law. So if you can imagine a small piece of gold that, right? A gold coin, essentially, an ounce, and the only place to go would be to Concord, to the treasurer. So then we would be paying employees mileage and time. So for municipalities, it might be a challenge under any type of mandated system for us to operate safely, effectively, and efficiently, and of course, preserving the principle of the tax dollar, because there's also costs for trading and spot, and there's all sorts of other logistics. As far as a digital currency, that would have to be much more understood and socialized for municipalities to understand what their role might be in a digital platform.
Thank you very much. Anything you'd like to say, Representative Gibbs? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming in. I guess my question is fairly general. Are the cities and towns set up to act as gold exchanges and calculate the price, since taxes are calculated in dollars, calculate the worth of, if somebody brought in gold coins to pay taxes, are they set up to calculate the worth? And what would they have to do to be set up that way?
So thank you for your question. That's an excellent question. No, we are not set up that way, and we are to purchase silver and gold right now, you'd have to go to a silver and gold dealer. In addition, we don't report other than payroll taxes to the IRS, and anytime you trade in more than $10,000 in precious metals, you do have to do reporting to the IRS, so those would be also additional pieces. But essentially, someone could come in at 9 a.m. and pay something in silver and gold, or ask for their paycheck in silver and gold, depending whether it's an employer or a taxation, and gold could be trading at $2,641, and by the end of the day, it could be higher or lower. And of course, we're decoupled from the US dollar. And we do business based on the value of the US dollar, not based on another commodity. So, because it's a commodity right now, it's in the commodities market. So, again, there would have to be a lot of education and training for a municipality to take that on. And the preservation of your tax dollar, maintaining its value, of course, is first and foremost on our minds.
And a
Follow-up?
comment as a follow-up?
Sure, this is
Thank
free
you.
for all. You can.
Okay. I actually am familiar with using different currencies. Most Americans, I agree, probably aren't. But when I was young, I traveled through a lot of small countries, one after another, over a period of a few weeks, and was constantly working from one currency to another. And what we dealt with were currency exchanges that were set up to calculate the value of those currencies, one against another or one against the dollar, however that particular one worked. So I'm aware of how complex this kind of thing actually is. And considering that gold is traded as a commodity, which, well, at that time, the Yugoslav, it may have been the dinar, I wouldn't swear to it, whatever the Yugoslav currency was when Yugoslavia existed, it wasn't being traded as a commodity in the same way that gold is. So I could see how that could be a lot more complicated.
All right, very good. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
So I'm going to make a recommendation for a motion and a report. So see if I can get this out of my. So we're going to recommend that this particular bill is not recommended for future legislation, but we may want to consider this amendment for future legislation, or at least studying it for future legislation. And what I guess what I would like to have a better understanding of, we just heard. Okay, let me just finish my thought here. We just heard that municipalities might not be able to manage it. We do have other states that have done this, and they even have sales and income taxes that they have to deal with. So maybe we need to delve a little more into how these other states are handling the concerns that you just raised before we craft legislation. And we would just narrow it down to the legal tender piece as like a stepping stone, as like a potential first step, but making sure that the municipalities aren't burdened by, you know, some unforeseen thing. So recommendation would be not for a future recommendation. The committee report, I'm going to mention studying existing states that have similar, and then referencing this amendment so at least people can find the amendment, which is the smaller version of the original bill. You want to add to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question, and it was actually for the Municipal Association. Well, for both of you, if memory serves, we have a requirement, I thought, in statute already. Maybe our committee researcher knows, or somebody here probably already knows. Don't we have a requirement that municipalities have to take cash for payment of certain things? Or was it enabling? Was that enabling? I thought we passed that at one point. Anybody remember? You do know? I don't. You don't know?
The city of Concord does take cash. I know this because I once had to pay my property taxes in cash. It was a long story and I won't bore you, but the city of Concord took cash for property tax.
Yes, we are required to take legal tender.
Okay. So
And-
the
and
follow-up part B is then, how many gold coins, and it's more than one, how many gold coins are legal tender? I mean, certainly the American Eagle is legal tender and it's a gold coin. And it's worth more than $50, which is what's marked on the face value.
So in that case, we can take it at its face value. So if it's a $5 coin, because it's our exchange at the bank, or 500, whatever the face value of the coin is how we currently have to do business. So for the
Right.
person handing you that, they would be losing a significant amount of money, right? Because I have a gold coin in a necklace. So if I use that as cash, I would only get its face value because I have to go to a chartered bank or a federally chartered bank authorized by the state of New Hampshire to do business. And it's whatever they will give me for that coin, which is its face value. right now.
Then what do you do with this 1 ounce $50 face value gold coin that's worth spot value $2,670 at today's spot price?
Face value, it's legal tender.
Doesn't
Well,
necessarily-
what applies? The $1,500 got to run it to the bank or the spot price?
The face value in this case would apply.
Okay, so you
But-
drop
but
it in a
if-
till
right.
like a $50 bill.
Right. But in this bill originally, as the sponsor crafted it, municipalities would have been required to take silver and gold as legal tender.
Right.
And that would include the commodity value, not the face value of the coin. And that's where the difference comes in, right?
Okay, I'm
Because
sure.
a $2 gold coin is just $2 to us.
I'm guessing it doesn't happen all that often that somebody.
I would hope that people
Yeah.
know what they have in their hand for value and would not.
The coin doesn't make it all the way to the bank, right?
So I have not heard of that in my role.
They stop
but
at a pawn shop and
All right.
It's
yeah,
possible.
sure.
All right. So that's a valid concern.
So
And,
anyhow,
So let's we'll talk about that other states have done this and that we should study what their approach was more before offering something similar to this amendment or something based off of it as a starting point. Something like that.
yeah, well, we should at least offer legislation that legal tender is legal tender. People should be able to pay with whatever legal tender they want to pay with, and it sounds like they already can.
But
And I think, sorry, I think we would want to find out, in addition to whether they've actually enacted it, which, I understand some states have, whether anybody is actually doing it, whether anybody is walking in to city tax office with gold coins to pay their property taxes, whether that's actually happened.
yeah, probably rarely. But it is very, you mentioned the face value of the coins, and just think about the disconnect between what the actual face value used to be and the value of the metal that's in the coin is drastically, there's a big, it kind of illustrates how the dollar is going down in value, each individual unit. So anyway, we won't beat that horse to death anymore. So I'll make a motion to, I'll just restate what I was going to write in the subcommittee report. Not recommended for future legislation for House Bill 1674. We need to study other states that have passed legal tender as specie bills, and we have a list of them. And then if we're going to move forward, potentially looking at Amendment 2024-0373H as a starting point, and implementing anything we find in researching these other states.
Second.
All right. Hopefully I said that correctly.
You did.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, 2-0, and we're done. Thank you very much.